What happens when a person is locked away and completely forgotten? Not just by friends or family, but by the very system that imprisoned them. No records, no stories, no mention in any book or trial. This isn't a work of fiction. It's a chilling look into a reality where history simply erases someone. Our story begins in an era of strict, almost absolute authority. Prisons were not places of rehabilitation. They were tools of control. In this environment, transparency was a foreign concept, and accountability was even rarer. The system was designed to be a black box, a place where people could disappear without a trace. The person at the center of this story wasn't a famous revolutionary or a notorious criminal. They were ordinary, just like you or me. No powerful connections, no public outcry. Their arrest was quiet, almost silent. No clear explanation was given, and the paperwork, if any existed, was minimal. As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that answers were not coming. Time just kept moving forward, leaving them behind. Inside the prison walls, life was governed by rigid, unyielding routine. Rules were followed without question, and individuality was systematically stripped away. Names became numbers, and personal identity began to fade like an old photograph left in the sun. The days were indistinguishable, a monotonous cycle of waking, eating, and sleeping, all under the same gray sky. Contact with the outside world was a privilege, one that was almost never granted. Letters sent out into the world were like messages in a bottle, cast into an indifferent ocean. They were never answered. The silence was deafening, a constant companion that slowly chipped away at the spirit. The prisoner tried to break this silence. They asked questions, filed requests, pleaded with the guards for information, but their words fell on deaf ears. Officials avoided any real engagement, offering vague non-answers or simply ignoring them altogether. Hope, once a burning flame, weakened into a faint, flickering ember. Compounding this isolation was the sheer chaos of the system's record-keeping. Files were poorly maintained, often misplaced or lost entirely. Prisoner transfers happened without documentation, creating a trail that led nowhere. With each misplaced paper, with each undocumented move, history was actively forgetting. The prisoner was becoming a ghost. Years crawled by. There was no trial, no formal hearing, no sentence to count down. Time itself became the punishment, an indefinite sentence with no end in sight. The prisoner watched as others came and went. New faces arrived, filled with fear and confusion. Old faces disappeared, sometimes released, sometimes transferred to another unknown fate. But through it all, they remained. A constant fixture in a world of transient suffering. As the years stretched on, their health began to decline. The neglect was systematic. The basic needs were met with the barest minimum, just enough to keep a body alive, but not enough to sustain a soul. Physical strength faded, replaced by a quiet, stubborn endurance. Resistance had long since proven futile. Now, only survival remained. Outside the prison walls, the world had moved on. Family members had searched, of course, but their efforts were met with bureaucratic brick walls. With no official records to follow, the trail went cold. How do you find someone the system claims never existed? Eventually, their searches slowed, then stopped. Personal memories, like official records, began to fade. The prison, and the system it represented, never acknowledged its error. In fact, it was designed to prevent such acknowledgments. Admitting a mistake would mean admitting a flaw in its absolute authority. So, silence became a shield. Neglect became an unspoken policy. It was easier to let one person be forgotten than to question the integrity of the entire structure. The prisoner learned to survive by becoming invisible. They mastered the routine, not out of hope for release, but because it was the only thing left. They stopped counting the days on the wall and started counting them internally, a silent testament to their own existence. Purpose had long since vanished, replaced by the simple, primal instinct to endure the next sunrise. This wasn't just a one-off mistake, a clerical error that slipped through the cracks. It was a reflection of a broader, more terrifying system, a system where forgetting was convenient and correction was a burden. A system that prioritized its own authority over human life. Our prisoner was suspended in time, caught in a state of limbo. They were neither convicted nor cleared, neither remembered nor officially erased. They simply were. A living paradox, a testament to the system's chilling capacity for indifference. The story doesn't end here, because the true cost of being forgotten was yet to be revealed. And that is a part of history we must never allow ourselves to forget. Life inside the prison walls settled into a relentless, grinding repetition. The days weren't lived. They were survived. Each one a carbon copy of the last, governed by the same strict, unyielding routines. Wake up, count, eat, work, sleep. The sun rose and set, but time itself began to feel like a forgotten concept, a river that had stopped flowing. Survival became an instinct, a mechanical process stripped of thought or emotion. The prisoner quickly learned the most crucial rule of this colorless world: stay unnoticed. To draw attention was to invite trouble, to risk the fragile peace of invisibility. So, silence became a shield. a cloak that offered a sliver of protection. Being just another shadow in a corridor of shadows felt infinitely safer than being seen. Meals were a grim affair, basic, bland, and often arriving at unpredictable hours. Hunger was a constant, dull ache. Medical care was a phantom, a rumor you heard about but rarely witnessed. If you were sick, you got better on your own or you didn't. Complaints were just whispers, lost in the vast, uncaring machinery of the institution. They went unheard, unanswered. Over time, the prisoner learned to replace expectation with endurance, to simply withstand whatever came. Slowly, inexorably, the outside world began to fade away, like an old photograph left in the sun. Letters, once a lifeline, dwindled and then stopped altogether. Were they being written, but not delivered? Or had the writers simply given up? It was impossible to know. Visits, once hoped for, never materialized. Every connection, every thread tying the prisoner to a life beyond these walls, frayed and then snapped. A profound, echoing isolation set in. The years bled into one another, marked only by the changing faces of the guards. New recruits would arrive, young and full of authority, but they knew nothing of the prisoner's story. The reasons for this long-ago confinement were buried in dusty, incomplete records, if they existed at all. When questions were asked, they were met with shrugs or warnings to mind one's own business. The past was a closed book, and no one was interested in reading it. Transfers happened abruptly, without warning or explanation. One day you were in one cell, the next you were being marched to another, perhaps in a different wing, a different block. The cells changed, but the conditions never did the same. Cold stone. The same pervasive damp, the same suffocating despair. Names were a luxury rarely afforded. Here, identity was a number, stamped on a file, occasionally shouted down a hall. It was a simple, brutal way to strip away a person's humanity, one digit at a time. Through the bars of the cell, the prisoner watched the comings and goings of others. Some inmates finished their sentences and walked out into the light, their faces a mixture of disbelief and joy. Others were transferred to different facilities, disappearing into another part of the system. But amidst all this movement, one absence remained constant, one person remained fixed in this forgotten corner of the world. Memories, once sharp and vibrant, became fragile things. The faces of loved ones from the past started to blur at the edges, their voices growing faint. Significant dates, birthdays, anniversaries lost their meaning and were eventually forgotten. The only thing that remained clear, the only thing that was certain, was the rigid, unchanging routine of the present. The prisoner's health began a slow, downward spiral. A bone-deep fatigue became a constant companion, a weight that never lifted. Aches and pains were just part of the background noise of existence, to be ignored because there was no alternative. The strength that had once powered this body through hardship began to fade, quietly, without ceremony. In a desperate attempt to hold on to a sense of time, the prisoner began to mark the days, scratching tiny, almost invisible lines into the stone wall of the cell. It was a small act of defiance, a way to prove that the days were still passing, that time hadn't stopped completely. Hope became tangled up in this simple act of counting, but even this became uncertain. Was a day missed? Was a mark counted twice? The apathetic march of time was a force too powerful to be captured by mere scratches on a wall? Yet, even in this bleak landscape, tiny, unexpected moments of kindness would sometimes appear, like wildflowers growing through cracks in concrete. A guard might speak a soft word, a rare moment of human connection. A meal might arrive still warm, a small comfort that felt monumental. These fleeting instances were cherished, were played over and over in the mind, because they were proof that humanity hadn't been entirely extinguished from this place. But these moments were exceptions, not the rule. The system itself remained as cold and indifferent as ever. No one came to review the case. No dusty file was ever pulled from a forgotten cabinet. The silence from the administration, from the world, was absolute and deafening. The prisoner had been swallowed whole, and the world had not even noticed. A strange and terrifying feeling began to take hold. The prisoner started to feel unreal, like a ghost haunting their own life. It was as if existence itself required acknowledgement from others to be real. Without anyone to see, to speak to remember, the very sense of self began to weaken and dissolve. Being forgotten felt like a second, slower kind of death, and yet, something inside refused to be extinguished. A tiny, resilient ember of selfhood glowed in the darkness. A stubborn core of memory resisted the relentless attempts at erasure. Deep within the confinement of the body in the cell, a spark of humanity survived. It was battered, and it was weary, but it was still there. This part of the story, this long, slow descent, is a quiet tragedy. No dramatic violence was needed to break this person. No final sentence had to be pronounced. The simple, passive act of forgetting was enough. Forgetting was the weapon. Forgetting was the punishment. Now, the prisoner senses a change in the air, a feeling that time is reaching a breaking point. The state of limbo cannot last forever. Something has to give. Either recognition will finally return, and the name and the story will be spoken again. or the disappearance will become absolute and permanent. The next phase, whatever it may be, will decide everything. One day, without ceremony or announcement, a life simply ended. For the prisoner, there was no final hearing, no last word, no official record of closure. In the vast, bureaucratic machinery of the system, their name vanished from every file, every ledger. It was as if they had never been there at all. The absence was absolute, a void where a person used to be. The gears of the institution kept turning, indifferent and uninterrupted. Forgetting, it turned out, was the most efficient process of all. Inside those walls, the prisoner's strength had been fading for a long time, a slow, quiet erosion of body and spirit. Help, when it was needed most, either arrived too late or never came at all. A cough that turned into something worse, a plea for a doctor that went unanswered, a growing weakness that was dismissed as nothing. There was no single, dramatic moment of crisis, just a gradual descent into silence. And when the end finally came, it was met with the same profound indifference. No record marked the time of death, no official report was filed. The only thing that followed was a quiet, sterile emptiness. A life had been extinguished, but the system registered only a vacancy. Meanwhile, outside the stone and steel, the world moved on, oblivious. Seasons changed, years passed. Families who had once waited and hoped eventually had to let go. Without a body, without a death certificate, without any official word, their grief was suspended in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Memories began to soften, the sharp edges of loss worn smooth by the relentless passage of time. How long can you search for someone the world insists has disappeared? How long can you mourn a ghost? Eventually, active searches dwindled and then stopped altogether. Without proof, without a trail to follow, there was nothing left to do. History, it seemed, had unceremoniously closed the page on this one. Forgotten life. Decades later, a meticulous archivist conducting a routine audit stumbled upon a discrepancy, a statistical anomaly. The number of inmates admitted over a certain period didn't perfectly match the number of those released, transferred, or officially deceased. A single digit was off. A ghost in the machine. The discrepancy was noted in a dusty file, a small footnote in a long report, but no full-scale investigation was launched. Unearthing a decades-old error was inconvenient. It would require pulling old records, interviewing retired staff, and admitting a systemic failure. It was far easier to adjust the numbers, to balance the books, with a simple correction. The truth was bared again, this time under a thin layer of administrative convenience. The truth remained unspoken, but it never truly vanished. A person had lived. They had breathed the air within those walls, felt the cold of the floor, and watched the slivers of light change through a barred window. They had a name, a past, and perhaps a family that once loved them. Their life had meaning, even if it was confined and controlled. And it ended, not with a bang, but with a quiet, deliberate erasure. The system had not just imprisoned a body, it had consumed a history. The final act wasn't punishment, it was oblivion. The erasure was complete. So why does this one story, this forgotten life, matter so much? It matters because it reveals a chilling truth. Forgetting is a powerful and dangerous tool. It shows us that immense harm can be inflicted not through direct action, but through deliberate inaction and systemic neglect. Apathy can be as deadly as a weapon. A system designed for control can, when left unchecked, replace judgment with indifference and process with neglect. Silence, in the face of suffering, can become a death sentence. The absence of a record becomes the absence of a crime. This is why remembering is an act of defiance. It challenges that suffocating silence. It's an attempt to restore a measure of dignity to a life that was stripped of it. By telling this story, we refuse to be complicit in the act of forgetting. We insist that this person existed, that their life had value, and that their loss is a tragedy. Remembering is also a warning. It shines a light on the dark corners of unchecked authority and institutional power. It reminds us that systems, whether they are prisons, governments, or corporations, are run by people and are therefore fallible. Without oversight, without accountability, they can fail in the most catastrophic ways. Accountability is the antidote to neglect. When we demand to know what happened, when we insist on seeing the records and hearing the testimonies, we are reinforcing the principle that every life matters. We are saying that no one should be disposable. No one should be allowed to simply disappear. We force the system to confront its failures, and in doing so, we create pressure for change. Remembering this prisoner is not just about honoring the past, it is about protecting the future. It's about ensuring that the mechanisms of justice serve to protect life, not erase it. If this story has stayed with you, if it has stirred something within you, don't let it fade. Keep it alive. Talk about it. Share it. Be the voice where official records have failed. In our own lives, let's be the ones who ask the difficult questions, who notice when someone is being overlooked, who refuse to accept silence as an answer. We must protect memory where systems are designed to forget. We must be the guardians of the stories that are too inconvenient to be told. It is this collective awareness, this shared act of remembering, that builds a bulwark against repetition. This was a story from the shadows of history, a whisper from a past that was meant to be silenced. We remember it today, not to dwell in the darkness, but to ensure that such a profound injustice is never, ever repeated. The most powerful tribute we can pay to the forgotten is to build a world where no one can be erased. Thank you for listening and for remembering. If this message resonates with you, please share it, so this story continues to be heard. Follow for more stories that need to be told.